Thank you for staying with us. Now let's get the show on the road. We're living in a Sustainable Development Goals era, that is SDG, where most countries are trying to put their efforts to improving human development, infrastructure, healthcare systems, sanitation, climate, and taking actions to prevent environmental degradation. After more than 10 years of conflict and countering terrorism, the situation in the Sahel remains unstable, putting thousands of civilians at risk, causing massive suffering, and forcing millions of people to flee their homes. In these 5,000 kilometers long belt lands stretching from Africa's Atlantic coast to the Red Sea, the humanitarian situation is extremely concerning, and security challenges have reached unprecedented levels. At the root of this situation, multidimensional challenges combine in a complex interaction which increases the instability in the Sahel, but the areas of improvement are numerous in a region full of opportunities. Just to say that we are on the edge of the Sahel, so whatever is happening in Sudan as it is taking place now will sooner or later affect us.
Just to also say that, quite a number of countries in the making up the Sahel stretches as far as some would say Libya.
Which is where our problem originally started.
Originally started from, and being made worse now by this conflict in the Sudan. Yes, to look at this with us this morning, and maybe to help us look at how this can be brought to an end, we have Oyewole Ogini, Civil Military Interaction, Technology Warfare and Peacebuilding Researcher, Center for Development Research, University of Bonn, Germany. Guten Morgen.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning, bonjour.
We also have joining us Professor Ademola Abbas, Professor of International Law and Global Security. Good morning, Prof.
Very good morning. Sorry, I can't say good morning.
Thank you for joining us today. Now, briefly, Mr. Ogini, give us a background into this crisis that we have on our hands right now, as briefly as you can.
Yeah, that's a very quite interesting question. I will first speak of Sahel itself. As you know, we always call it ungoverned space, which means a place that lacks state presence very strongly. Although we debate about this, but there are three things that characterize this conflict, and is the security, the state welfare, and the functioning system of the state, especially at the border side, where the presence of state is always felt very low. So if I now talk about Sahel, most often we always talk about Mali, Burkina Faso, Chad, and then most often we don't talk about Nigeria and Cameroon. And this part are also Sahel. In fact, if you go to the border side, you will see Sahelian. So these are another identity that these people wear themselves. So in this area, characterized by climate change, also deprivation, marginalization, if I may call it, in terms of, if you compare with the people at the center, then you will know that the standard of living is quite low there. And this also paves way for, for different non-state actors to also exercise control in terms of providing resources, to different people. And then we also see them as a messiah, in quotes, who can deliver them. So then this move to Sudan, I think maybe as we further the discussion, we will know better what is really happening. But at the moment, Sudan have a huge crisis. Over 20,000 people crossed from Sudan border between few days to Chad, and there's also militia within this border that could also affect Nigeria potentially. We will get back to that. Thank you.
Professor, With this very brief background, how is it, therefore, that we have two generals, should I say, heading the two factions that are currently at war in the Sudan? Isn't there any way of calling them to order?
Well, thank you very much. That's, again, a very interesting question on its own. If you want to understand what is going on today in Sudan, you have to go a bit back, maybe not too far in the past, but to probably about 2003, thereabout, when the Darfur crisis happened. And that was when al-Bashar's government decided to use the Janjaweed, which are the Arab Darfurians, basically, to attack the Black Darfurians, which was a contestation of the resources, between the herders and the land and the farmers and so on and so forth. But what was interesting at that point in time was that the Janjaweed rebel troop that the government relied on to prosecute that war against the Black Darfurians was actually headed by one of the two generals we are talking about, and that is General Mohammed Hamdan Dagolo, otherwise called Hemedti. He was leader of the Janjaweed. He's an Arab Darfurian at that point in time. So he was able to help the government of Bashar to suppress the Black Darfurians, in which then he became incorporated informally by Bashar's government into his own government. That is, he headed the army, his own army, that's General Hemedti's army, was then transformed into what then became known as the Rapid Support Force for the government of Bashar. And by 2013, Bashar then officially constituted the RSF into a distinct unit of army, which was not integrated into the national army, but it was functioning side by side the Sudanese national army. So that was headed by Dagolo himself. And that obviously pleased the head of state then, that President al-Bashar, because he was able to use the RSF for whatever insurrections he wanted to quell, or whatever counter-insurgency, just as Idris Deby in Chad did in those days, being paid for by the United States and France. So that's one of the generals. But if you remember very well, by, I think, 2015, about when the Yemeni crisis started, the government of Sudan then did a deal with Saudi Arabia during the Saudi and the Emirati intervention in Yemen, and they deployed Sudanese army, into Yemen. But the Sudanese army that was deployed into Yemen was headed by Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, one of the second general. However, he was on the part of the National Army of Sudan. But the soldiers he was relying to were mainly the RSF soldiers, basically, because the RSF soldier commanded by Hemedti had become very, very powerful, more powerful than the National Army itself. So you have a national general, and that is Abdel Fattah, who was commanding a national troop in another country, Yemen, but relying on the rebels, on a band, of internal, rebels constituted by the same government. So you have an explosive, disaster already waiting to happen. So that was what the two generals, came. However, when Bashar was overthrown in 2019, there was a transitional government put in place. Of course, it was at the behest, obviously, of the second general, that's General Abdel Fattah himself. And they promised that there was going to be a transition. By 2021, they toppled that itself, and they then held power, in which case Abdel Fattah became the de facto ruler of Sudan with the national army, but he was still happy to keep, Hemedti, and his RSF as, his deputy, who was operating with, outside. So they had that agreement 2021 written, albeit. And the plan was by the end of this year, 2023, there will be a transition to civilian government. Now, the current crisis then happened about, now, if we have that transition, who is going to control the national army? Don't forget that General Abdel Fattah is the de facto president of the country. He is in charge of the national army. While Hemedti, that is Dagolo, second general, is controlling the RSF, which is far more powerful anyway. So they are president, sort of leader and the deputy. The question is, if you integrate and do now transfer power, who controls the national army? That is the pretext for the current crisis between the two generals. However, the most subtle pretext is the control for resources. Don't forget that by 2013, about 2017, The same guy, General Dagolo, that's Emeti, went after the Darfurians again and was able to capture the gold mine in Darfur, if you remember, after he captured Musa Hilal, who is a rebellion from the Black Darfurian. He captured the gold mine. So he had the gold mine. But so this, and since 2017, he has been pushing forward to have more resources, more control of resources. So that is the real, is a control of resources that is at the base of this. But they will tell you politically is how to distribute power between the two generals should the civilian government come at the end of the year, which is not, by the way, it's not possible to have a civilian government by the end of this year or anytime soon. I think that is the story of the two generals in a nutshell.
Well, you know, even this nutshell is quite huge, and I think it dates way back, even before the independence. Let me go back to Mr. Ogini. I think it dates back even before the independence, because before independence there were conflicts. After independence, there were conflicts, dates back even as far back as 1972. There was a ceasefire called and all of that. It would seem then, Mr. Ogini, that there is a deeper problem. Where we are going with all of these is how exactly this affects the West African sub-region and Nigeria specifically. What are the frayed nerves that need to be mended quickly so that things don't get any worse? So it would seem, Mr. Ogini, that there was never, calmness, complete peace in the environment until now, and that this is just a festering of something that existed before now that had only been managed until now, or isn't it? What are the deep problems of this unrest that has festered for so many decades?
Well, I want to just say that, as Prof said, the military-aid group itself has served also international community. In what sense? The armed group controls some resources at the border, even close to the Chad, and this also area, try to cause some conflict with Chadian government. And at the same time, in the Libya route, they also serve to prevent the migrants who also want to find their way into Europe. So in this context, they also serve as a watchdog to control this irregular migrant. So this role that they perform in form of a state function actually make them to sustain themselves even right from before independence and up to now. So you could see that if you see the trajectory of Sudan, it starts from 1950s, the first coup, another coup, another coup, another coup. And I was interviewing one of the Sudanese 2 days ago, trying to ask what was your opinion, and one of them said, what, we do not care about the two factioning leaders, they are just deceiving us. What we wanted when we protested on the street was civilian government, but they could not get that. The African Union could not succeed to get that, but the main point there now is about stability. In the past, people always say we want democracy, but the international community is more concerned about technical stability. I use the word technical stability to say, okay, if there's crisis here, we're going to also face the consequence, So we just rather say everything is all right and let them get stable relatively. So this is the context. In terms of resources, there are also multinational companies that benefit from this conflict. The mining and etc. is one of the things. It is not just only the armed group. The armed group said to some people, they benefit quite a lot from them. Another delicate issue which you could look at is between Chad and Sudan itself. There are some resources, if you could actually remember that Sudan also have a sanction in some area, but there are some particular resources that is not sanctioned. Sometimes these resources, there's a contestation whether it belongs to Sudan or it belongs to Chad. So this is a reflection. But most importantly, which I'm concerned with, is Nigeria. Because as we know historically, Muhammad Ali also was trained in Sudan, who is the first founder of Boko Haram. So there's a relation quite well with Sudan and Nigeria's security context.
We will definitely get there, because that's where it's all going, this whole conversation. Prof, So you may also want to add a thing or two to what Mr. Ogini has said about this fundamental issues that have refused to go away. But add to your response, if you intend to, the fact that Nigeria has one country between it and the Sudan. If Nigeria does not share borders with Libya, and the effect of what happened in Libya has already been felt in Nigeria. I mean, it was something we'll remember, former President Obasanjo has said over time. And there is just one country between Nigeria and the Sudan. How vulnerable is Nigeria?
Well, it doesn't really matter how many countries are between Nigeria and Sudan, whether it's Chad, whether it's Burkina Faso, whether it's even South Africa, whichever country you put between, what I'm trying to say is that the physical propinquity doesn't really determine most of the times the consequences you get, because when you talk about geography, it just like somebody asking you what is a regional integration. In those days, there was emphasis on geographic propinquity. But we do know very well that at the peak of communism, countries in Latin America, they fare closer to communist countries in Africa here than capitalist countries. But having said that, what is important to take away here is that, number one, we have extremely porous borders in Nigeria. Don't just kid ourselves about that. Then we have a lot of cultural inclination, be it religion, ethnocentrism, and so many other things that will permeate and will make all those kind of things very permissible. But before I come to that, let me just add to what Mr. Bennett said. And I quite agree with his analysis in terms of the causes, the ancient causes. It goes way, way beyond that in the 50s and 56 or whatever, when independent. If you go back, maybe you want to go back down to a long term during the Khalifa regime, 1888 to about 1893 or thereabout. You've always had this problem. For me, apart from what he said, you have to also add into it resource control, within the country itself. And that resource control, you have to take, it's already spoken about the MTN, the multinational corporations, for instance. And we saw the role they play in Sierra Leonean crisis, in the Liberian crisis of diamond, of which obviously you can go and watch Nollywood movies, Blood Diamond, or even closer home here, Beast of No Nations and stuff like that. So there's resource control between, for instance, in Darfur, between the Arab Darfurians and the Black Darfurians, between the herdsmen and the farmers and the agrarian. That is always there, pretty much like something that we had in Nigeria here. But when you also go beyond that, is the question of the tribal delineation of the country, between the Muslim North and the Christian South. But if you even walk down, then you have a clear case of marginalization. And that is where we have to be very careful in Nigeria. Just like what happened in Rwanda between the Hutus and the Tutsis. Don't forget, 1994 was not the first genocide. There was a mini genocide in 1959 or thereabout, and so on and so forth, because there was marginalization. And that is why what is going on in Sudan today is very, very difficult, very, very intricate. And that is because this is the first time that somebody from outside the Khartoum establishment will be taking this particular measure, and that is General Dagolo. He's not part of the Khartoum establishment. He's an outsider, and it's an outsider who feels that his tribe has been brutally marginalized for a long time, and that is a big challenge. So you have to understand that. Why I'm saying that is that he feels that he is of a particular tribe, and they cut across the Sahel. They cut across many countries in West Africa, down to Nigeria, down to northern part of Nigeria, across Burkina Faso, across Mali. It's just like the same crisis that you have in DRC Congo. You have almost 6 countries in that region that are affected, across border from Uganda to Tanzania. So you have to be mindful of all the implications of that. So for me, apart from all those things that the gentleman mentioned, you talk about the resource control, you talk about the tribal delineation of the country, then you talk about marginalization. And I think those are things that we have to worry about when it comes to in terms of the spill over. As we've said, only one country divides Nigeria. So physically, that is problematic. But the amount of also weapons that will wash, from Sudan into countries like Chad, we have to be very, very careful, because we already know what is going on in Nigeria today. And because of our porous border, we should expect a lot of, all we can hope. For now, I don't think the current government, which is outgoing, can do anything between now and May 29. But I think that is going to be one of the great priorities of the incoming government to make sure that they address the issue of the porosity of Nigeria's borders, apart from other question of security that they definitely will have to address when they come.
Mr. Ogini, this problem in the Sudan has been festering for some time, and with these two generals coming in now, it has hit the capital, Khartoum, and we just saw some footage there now of what was happening in the city, and even the end of Ramadan ceasefire that was called didn't seem to have had any effect. What is the African Union doing about this because of the number of people who have been killed and the number of people who have become refugees in the neighboring states?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting question you ask. I mean, I'm not speaking on behalf of African Union, but what I could say is that, yes, as I said before, the aspect of stability, what we call stability in international context, we need to start questioning it. When this agreement happened, after the protest, and then the two warring leaders came together, but the citizens who protested on the street did not agree with the agreement. So this is one thing that is still there. The second point is the militia leader itself started branding himself as a true leader to his people, as Professor Ademola said. So this also has effects on the acceptance which is trying to gain at the moment. Then the third point is IGAD. IGAD is another regional like ECOWAS, maybe not as strong as ECOWAS, which is charged, to address this issue. And interestingly, South Sudan president is on mission right now on that. But again, this will also come back to the people. How much people accept this agreement? Okay, so if people accept it, then maybe a transition could be possible. But the question is, the two leaders, are they really willing to leave power?
No.
So this is the question. Then on the resource control, I just want to delve into that, which we don't always talk about. The Lake Chad Basin, which concerns us so much, we only talk about climate change. But the Lake Chad Basin has a huge resources, huge one. According to evaluation, Nigeria is supposed to benefit up to $20 billion annually from natural gas and crude oil. Okay? Each time Nigeria tried to conduct any activities on this land, Boko Haram will attack, Iswa will attack. But I want you to know that since 2011, Chad has commenced exploration in its own part of Lake Chad. Niger did the same. And the French company, work alongside with these two countries and using the pipeline already developed by Cameroon itself, and then the exploration continue. So it's a whole lot of things about resources that we still need to look at when it comes to this conflict.
Well, Mr. Ogini, something you mentioned the other time, let me stay with you for a bit, about foreign influence on the Sudan. And how significant is that in the scheme of things? And why does it seem that the countries, the tribes, the national interests within the country Sudan are unable to mend fences, come together and be one, refusing to allow those foreign influences to break them up?
Yeah, I mean, as you could say, Professor Ademola said something about Nigeria. Okay, if you want to say Nigeria is not influenced internationally, it's a question. It's influenced. What we consume, the media, the social media, how much we trust local media compared to the international media is one of the ways this is influenced. So if citizens can believe much more the validation of international media compared to the local media, then that's the first thing you should think about. Then on the second point, if you look at Libya is called fragile state. Some say failed state, although I do not believe in the concept of failed state because Africa itself has its own customary, traditional system, which is still struggling to overcome. And this give way to, for instance, the essence of traditional ruler who happen to be the first point of contact when there is a conflict, and then the system we still practice, even including Nigeria. I will not call it a true democracy, but rather hybrid democracy. Hybrid democracy in the sense that the people at the local area, they still believe in the traditional system and they could reach out to this leader when there is a conflict. And we are still trying to bring it, this idea of local government, this state government, in order to bridge the gap, but it's not yet happening. We will get there, but so this has a whole lot when it comes to how citizens get close to the government and how they cooperate. There was a project we conducted with EU on youth participation in this conflict zone, Nigeria, Chad, Niger, and Cameroon. I was there some time ago, and then I met one of the local chiefs in the far north of Cameroon, and he said, for the first time, we had never had this sort of interaction with our youth because they see us as an enemy. And we also say that they don't care about us, but now they feel that we are part of them. They can discuss with us our problem. So this is one of the dynamics of how collaboration could happen. And for Nigeria, you could also tell more about that.
Professor, we understand that even humanitarian work has ceased because there's no access and street battles are quite common. How would you advise that those carrying out humanitarian work should access the people to be able to help them? Because many of them happen to be in dire straits from what we're told.
Well, thank you very much for that. Look, it's always very difficult because you have people who are trying to do good in a very difficult situation. More often than not, international humanitarian bodies rely on the goodness and the goodwill and understanding of warring factions. And that is why it's very important that even though you are a humanitarian organization, if you want to deploy to a country, it's better you always have the consent, so to say, of warring parties. Otherwise, you are going to open yourself to attack and stuff like that. There are rules of international engagement. For instance, again, there are bodies like Doctors Without Borders, the ICRC, the Red Crescent, and so many, which bodies have attained some level of international acceptability and acceptance in terms of their neutrality and in terms of their being able to do good in those things. So they are already practicing the field. What is a bit disheartening is the inability of many countries to evacuate their foreigners, and Nigeria is caught in that. I'm sure if you've been following what Honorable Abike Dabiri has been saying for a couple of days now, who's in charge of the Akura, about the fact that the federal government of Nigeria couldn't uplift our students. There are 400 Nigerian students in Sudan, and that is simply because a couple of days ago airplanes were bombed down. So it's very difficult for air flights now to take off and get the kind of protection that we don't want to evacuate our students. We need to get them blown up from the sky. So it's a balancing act, and I think government will be talking to government of Sudan, talking to rebels to make sure they get agreement. As we are doing that, obviously international bodies will be doing the same thing with their respective organizations with the conflicting parties in Sudan. It is, what is going on there in Sudan, just as you were saying earlier on, is a clarion call again, because I remember you asked a question about the African Union. You might not be aware. I was an expert for African Union for almost a year. Actually, I drew the memorandum on the understanding between the African Union and what we call REX, Regional Economic Communities, in the field of peace and security. So that if there's a contestation, for instance, in terms of deployment between maybe a REC like IGAD that you mentioned, or ECOWAS, or SADC, or ECA, and African Union wants to deploy, the question is who has the first shot is it a continental or sub-regional organization? I drafted that MOU for the African Union between 2005 and 2006. And I remember very well when I was working on that treaty. And we made it very clear that, number one, we are a part of the global community. We can wait for the United Nations system. But the UN is not going to do anything in Africa unless it has a strategic interest in that particular place. Remember what happened in Liberia? The United States warship was sitting quietly in the waters of Liberia when people were being killed. At that point in time, the US had no impact. Javier Pérez de Cuellar was the Secretary General of the UN at that point in time. And he came out and said it openly, and I'm quoting him verbatim. He said, it is only countries in the area of conflict that should be expected to take the lead in the crisis. That is what you get when it comes to Africa. That is not what you get when it comes to Europe or some other part of the world where you are members on the permanent seat of the Security Council. But when it comes to Africa, it's a question of who has an interest. And that is why the effort of the Nigerian government during the ECOWAS and ECOMOG interventions of the 1997 to year 2000 and beyond in Liberia and Sierra Leone should be commended forever, because without that, we don't know where we'll be today in this particular region. And ECOWAS proved to be formidable at that point in time. Unfortunately, and I have to say, African Union has not been able to live to that level. Basically, you have an African Union that is intrinsically very weak from within, yes. And I say that categorically. Yes. Two countries drive African Union today: Nigeria and South Africa. Then plus minus countries like Egypt on the side.
But why is that the case, Prof? Because, this same African Union, just a second, sir. Yeah. This same African Union evolved from OAU. And the whole reason of becoming African Union instead of Organization of African Unity is for political reasons, so that we can be able to galvanize ourselves better. That was what was sold to the people. So what is the problem?
No, Ayo, it's a very interesting question, and I will answer it straight away for you. I will try to be as brief as possible, because you asked me to talk about my PhD thesis as a whole. Now, part of the problem with OAU was the formation. When the OAU was formed in 1962-63, Organization of African Unity was formed primarily to protect African sovereignty against colonial government. Not about people's development at all. That was not part of the agenda. Because OAU wanted to be the center focus to rid Africa of the relics of colonialism, still in South Rhodesia, that is Zimbabwe, and British West Africa, Southern Africa, and Namibia and co. I could understand that when the OAU was formed, all members of all independent states of Africa were brought in to be members. There was need for numbers. However, when African Union was going to be established in 2000, I was hoping, as many followers or observers were hoping, that we will have learned the mistakes of having every country in the continent being a member of the organization without having values that they must subscribe to. Let me explain to you. Today, the European Union is just how many countries in the EU today? Turkey is one of the most powerful, most economically prosperous countries in Europe. It's not a member of the European Union. You know why? Because Turkey has not been able to comply with all the values of the European Union. So because of that, if a Turkish student is going to study in France, which is an EU member, Turkish student will pay the same fee as I would pay as a Nigerian. Turkey is treated as a foreigner in Europe. It's not a member of the European Union yet. Turkey is killing itself today to join the EU because Turkey understands the benefits that will come to Turks by being in the European Union. Farmers will get subsidies, they will get borderless Europe in terms of cross movement, they will get 500 million European strong market, and so on and so forth. So there are benefits for you to join the EU. But also there are sticks if you violate the regulation. If you violate competition law, you will be slammed by EU with billions of dollars they are going to pay. If there is a coup in your country, they will expel you from the EU, and you know what expulsion from the EU means, and so on and so forth. So you work to join the EU. And when you work out to join the EU, you know the benefits there. So you dare not violate that. Flip it into African Union. 2000, we called everybody again, come on, because we just simply transported everybody in the OAU to the African Union. I said, no, that was a whole mistake. And I wrote a whole paper. I said, what we need to do at that point in time to say, we are going to establish African Union. We are going to start with 6 democratic states. Just as the European Union began in 1957, you establish a small community. Put your criteria down. If you want to join the AU, you cannot have a military dictatorship in your country. It has to be democracy. No corruption, no this, no that. Borderless. You establish all those. Pick 5 or 6 countries in Africa then. And I know them that will have been there. Ghana will have been there. Botswana would have been there, South Africa would have been there. Countries that have practiced democracy for a good number of years successfully will be there. Now, when they join, keep others out, including Nigeria, until we can prove that we maintain, we fulfill all those criteria. Then one by one, begin to take us in. When a country works so hard to join the membership of the organization, they cannot just put through the organization. Yeah. Let me ask you a question, and the rest. Do you think the African Union today can suspend Nigeria or South Africa from AU? AU will die, I can tell you straight away. Yeah. I work for an expert. African Union will die. But today, Britain leaving the European Union doesn't mean anything to the European Union. At the end of the day, you know that because they still have members that pay all the dues, that play by the rules. On the other hand, Britain today is actually feeling the pinch of not being in the European Union, and they begin to do some civil deals, not to join, but to be able to still enjoy certain things. What I'm saying in essence is that we lost the plot in 2000 when we began a new continental organization without value system or criteria that will be checked against democratic values and tenets that we will use, will be applied to memberships and to be able to bring them in. Look, let me give you the final example. Look at NATO today. If Ukraine were to be in Africa, it would have been a member of NATO by now. Make no mistake, it would have joined the European Union by now. But no, we support you, we throw euros to you, we throw dollars to you, we stand by you until you fight Russia to stand still. But we are not in a hurry to bring you in. Our values are our values. You must comport with our value system, and that is important. And what I'm talking about this value system is not only when you join the European Union. Go back to 1969. Greece at that point in time was just what we call an accession state. That is a state aspiring to join the Union. Greece was just aspiring, then there was a coup, Cornelius coup in Greece. Greece was suspended by the European Union, even though it had not even joined at that point in time fully. That tells you the intolerance of the European Union for those anti-value systems. Now in African Union, and Mr. Akini said something very interesting the other time. You know, African Union doesn't have a lot of legitimacy in terms of dealing with coups in Africa today. You know why? You have civilian government that are repressing their people. African Union doesn't say anything. You don't say anything. Then you have a coup, which is supported by people in that country. Then African Union Charter say, oh, we don't want coup plotters, we want to suspend you. So you don't want coup plotters, but you are happy to keep repressive civilian governments in power. And that is a problem. We saw it in Mauritania a few years down the road, ago. So what I'm saying in essence is that African countries have to wake up. African Union headquarters, the new one was built by the Chinese. You know what is interesting? There was going to be a conference at a point in time to raise funds. African Union was even begging for money from international donors. They are begging for money to host a conference to raise funds. I couldn't understand it. You couldn't even put your own money to have a conference to raise funds. So African Union is weakened internally, structurally is weakened, and I say that anyway. It's completely. So it's a group of. And I don't want to repeat this again. I don't want to be uncharitable to African. It's our continental organization. We have to support it. Truth is, it does not apply muscles at all, and that is because foundationally it is weak. It cannot have muscles that it should have.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. What a way to describe the AU. But Mr. Ogini, Prof mentioned something in passing, which I think is more important than he tried to make us believe, the issue of Nigerians living in Sudan and Nigeria trying to get them out. And he said, our government will have to talk to their government. And I was thinking, so which is their government that we're going to talk to get our 400 students out?
Yeah, I mean, that's a quite interesting thing that we should reflect. If you remember when the Ukraine crisis started, Nigerians and Africans, they struggle quite a lot. Okay, we have quite a lot of them that also move illegally to Germany and other move to Romania, and
Poland.
The response should be there's embassy. Nigeria has an embassy that's existing there. So this embassy is supposed to function. They built relationship with a specific government, so they really know what to do exactly. But the point is, the Nigerian in Sudan said the embassy was not responding to them. So this is another question that we have to reflect. So if the embassy couldn't respond to the Nigerian citizen, then what else could that be done? So I think this is very simple. So the government is always there. We have President of Sudan recognized internationally, you know, whether there's a factioning, I mean, this is another question. So this legally constituted authority, you know, I mean, somehow could find a way out. I think the Egyptian troops were taken from Sudan 2 days ago. So, and then after immediately the Egyptian troops were taken, then the fight continued. So definitely there could be a way out. Many other countries are also trying that.
Well,
yeah, so maybe I just want to say to what Professor Ademola said, the point is EU is a supranational institution. So supranational institution is an institution that actually overrides the interests of nationality. So in that sense, the country itself, when they make law, if you look at what happened in Poland recently, Poland made a law against the children, and the EU said that is against the European Union, you know, Court of Justice, and then that will be ruled out. The same thing with what is happening in Hungary right now. So when you look at African Union itself, is built based on strong men, the strong leaders. The control of the institution is based on the president rather than the technocrat who is running the institution. So this is, if you look at the policy, there are quite a lot of policy, there are quite a lot of Agenda 2063 of different dimensions. Even the African Peace Fund is funded by EU. Now that we have a Ukraine crisis, you definitely know that a lot will not go on there. So this is the issue. Thank you.
Does that then mean, Mr. Ogene, that the Sudan crisis is a hopeless one?
Oh, well, there's no crisis that cannot be solved. It all depends on how, you know, how African leaders take this conflict. You know, I mean, as Prof. Ademola said, you know, we are the first to act. Then when we act, then others follow. Okay? If we don't act, then others decide for us. It is time for Africa, for instance, to start taking a position. You have to, that is what he's trying to say about, you know, Ukraine, we are being with you, and this is the same thing. If we start taking a position, then the rest of the world will think about how to work with us. But if we don't take a position, they will take their own perspective, their own way of life, their own concept of development, their own way of democracy. They take it to us, and we must accept it. So this is what happened.
Prof. Mr. Ogene, staying with you on that question that you asked, I would like your opinion about that. How have African nations been reacting to this crisis?
Well, as I said, I mean, IGAD recently, because it's the fragmented nature, as Professor Ademola also said, regional integration, we have what we call spaghetti, you know, this sort of spaghetti that we have within, for instance, Central African Union, they have CIMAC, they have another one, and you know, then you have within the SADC region, then you have Tanzania, who belong to Eastern region, also belong to Southern region. Then we have the ECOWAS. You know, you remember Morocco wanted to become part of ECOWAS at some point. So this mushrooming of, I don't want to call it mushrooming, but I would say this mushrooming of regional institution also weaken the status of African Union. Maybe it does not. I don't know, but I will say this also affects how they could act. For instance, in the case of Mali, you know, if ECOMOG had acted, maybe it would have much more effective than calling France. But the president at that time, you know, called France to come and intervene. So France came and intervened, but what we have today is still there, it's still the same. I mean, with more respect to French military who died in the course of that, you know. But if you look at it, the success of ECOMOG in Liberia, then you could say that at that time, the United States turned its back at Liberia. Liberia used to be an armbag or a pocket of the United States, you know. So this is the situation. Okay. The African leaders need to act. They have African Union. We have the chairperson. Beyond condemnation statement, they need to act, and they need to get there. They have to find a way to get there and to call these people to order.
Well, Prof, just in 30 seconds, if you can help us do this, how do we insulate Nigeria beyond just other countries acting? How can we insulate Nigeria from this impending crisis, if I can use the term, in 30 to 60 seconds, if you can.
In closing.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, look, insulation is going to be difficult because we are part of a global community. But straight away, we can do that. As I said, we need to tighten our borders. We need to engage regional partners. And again, that is when I talk about talking to government, their government. Of course, we don't talk to government without going through the embassy anyway. Our embassy in Sudan, like anywhere, is Nigerian government in that country. So that's obviously what I mean by that. So we have to be able to engage. By doing that, at least, we'll be achieving some things. And Nigeria has to, again, engage within ECOWAS to see what ECOWAS can do to secure West African region as a whole against that kind of the consequences. And again, within the African Union, Nigeria has a lot of weight in the African Union to be able to move countries in that country to quickly take decisions to be able to address the situation. But as Mr. Ogene said, part of our problem is what he was trying to say. We call it the spaghetti bowl effect, in which you have, proliferation of regional organizations, like Sensad, which is in Libya. Nigeria is a member of Sensad. We begin to wonder, how can Nigeria and West Africa be a member of Sensad? So again, that weak instinct. In terms of supranationality we talked about, that was precisely what I was referring to without the tab, when I talked about we should have started in 2000 by building blocks. Because in supranationality, you must be able to give away part of your sovereignty. Otherwise, nothing will happen. So Nigeria needs to act, A, on its own as a country, tightening your borders, number one. Two, work within your region, or sub-region, that is, go through ECOWAS to see what can. We have frameworks already that you can rely on within ECOWAS sub-region to be able to tighten our security and to be able to, for example, plan for if it comes to that you may have refugees, God forbid, just as in Liberia when they came to Nigeria, we have to be able to prepare for that. Then Nigeria should be able to work within African Union to be able to motivate similar countries. Final thing I would say is that in terms of talking, you don't just go and talk to the government. That's why I say you have to talk to the rebel factions. One of the dangers you can have in an internal conflict is to go and talk to. Now, Mr. Again, talk about the government, that the president, they have a president in Sudan who was recognized. Yes, General, Al-Assad is the president, but the party president, no doubt, but he's not controlling the most powerful army in the country. The most powerful army is vice president, and that's why you have to talk to all the rebel groups. Otherwise, you can.
Okay, thank you very much. Professor of International Law and Global Security, Ademola Abbas, who joined us via Zoom from Abeokuta. And we also had Oyewole Ogini, Civil Military Interaction Technology, Warfare and Peacebuilding Researcher, Center for Development Research, ZEF, University of Bonn, Germany. Thank you very much for sharing your insights with us this morning, both of you. Sunrise will return home in just a moment. Do stay with us.